This is Ryan Poley. Welcome to the How Did I Get Here podcast. This is a conversation I had with Greg Vernick, the owner of Vernick Food and Drink, Vernick Fish in Philadelphia. Greg Vernick, thanks for coming to hang out with us.
Good to be here.
I'm really super excited to talk to you. I think Vernick Food and Wine, is that the full name of it?
Well, it's food and drink.
Food and drinks. Vernick's Food and Drink. I think I've eaten there the most out of any American restaurant I've ever eaten at, because I was in Philly in 2014. I think I ate there every weekend for 2 months. And every time I come back to Philly, which is often enough, I eat there. I think I've eaten there 15 times in my life. And it keeps getting better and better. So hats off to you. Thanks, basically what the podcast is, how did we get here is the name. And I just kind of want to know your story of how did you get to owning a restaurant, a deal with the Four Seasons, a coffee shop, and I'm sure that you're working on some other things. So when did you start cooking?
Well, hey man, when did I start cooking? Already hitting the hard questions.
Let's start with your name.
So I grew up in restaurants, and I grew up in food and around food, and my mother owned a restaurant in Haddonfield, New Jersey, which is technically a suburb of Philadelphia. South Jersey is a pocket that we always view as a suburb of Philly.
Right.
So I tell the story. It's in my blood. It's something I grew up in. It was a bus stop after school for me. Was my mom's restaurant. Like, it was that embedded into our life that we would spend every day at my mom's restaurant. My grandfather worked in the kitchen. I would go on deliveries with him. It was a sandwich shop. Uh-huh. So, but it was just there. I was always around a kitchen. It's always been a place where I feel most comfortable. I think the analogy I give is it's like an athlete who touches the field. It's just where they feel like, put me in any kitchen and I can find my way. Yeah. And I imagine you're the same way.
Same way.
Whether it's a high volume, quick service, fine dining,
a friend's apartment,
yeah. I'm going to be able to sort of find my way and get to work. Mm-hmm. And I think that started at a very young age, and it kind of led into the formative years of well, what are you going to do after school? And it's an interesting time back then, because when we were kids, I'm 42. Emerald had just started hitting the scene, but it wasn't looked at the way it is looked at now.
Nobody knew what a culinary art was.
No.
And a chef was kind of like a blue-collar job lumped in with a city worker,
100%.
Cop, a mechanic. I said that I wanted to get into the culinary arts, and my mom was like, what the fuck is a culinary art? In 1995, no idea what any of that was. So
yeah, man. And so I went through that same process, and as a kid, my parents were no. They said, no, you have to go to college, and you have to get a degree, and that's also a talking point at some point is the value of a college degree right now. Maybe for another podcast.
Yeah, part two. The Vernick part 2. Yeah.
But I had a good support system around me, and I was able to kind of combine this need to go to college and this love for kitchens and restaurant, and we found a university that kind of checked those boxes. So I went to Boston University.
Did you feel the need to go to college was not your need? It was something set up by your parents. It was pressure. It was the social norm.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't say it in a negative context.
No, it's like osmosis. It was there. You graduate high school, of course I'm going to go to college.
Right.
It's what's expected of you internally. Like, this is the progression of life.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't know any other way.
Yeah. There was no other way. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's changed, or maybe it's changing. but yeah, it was just you know, in a lot of ways we all applied to the same colleges. You know, my friends and I was like, where are you applying? What are you going to, you know, it was a thing.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, I think the first time I really saw cooking and kitchens from a different lens was at a restaurant in Boston called Clio.
Yes.
And I was an extern there.
Uh-huh.
And the chef and owner is Ken Oringer, who is a legend and very special to me. And I know now a lot of people who've come through his, you know, mentorship and tutelage and nature of working and fearlessness. And that's when I said, oh, okay, this is different.
Who was in the kitchen at that time you were there? Talbot wasn't there, was he?
Who?
Alex Talbot?
He was not.
Yeah.
No. Okay, there was a French guy named Richard. There was a very excellent line cook who was nicknamed Powder.
Nice. Great name.
Yeah. And I believe he's still around. This guy, Scott. You know, this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was all aspiring chefs.
Yeah. Some great people have gone through that. Through
Right.
Ken Orange's
And
kitchen.
it was a very competitive and aggressive at times and terrifying at times environment. Again, something that could be, it has changed and has needed to evolve, but I saw something where I was like, this is almost like a competitive sport.
Yeah.
And I got to hold my own. And I'm young and inexperienced, and I'm surrounded by
killers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, that, I think the combination of having something rooted deeply in my family culture and then being able to see a very competitive fine dining kitchen, that I think shaped how my path forward.
Yeah. What were the things that Ken taught you that you still learn, that you still use today?
It's about being fearless. There was a degree of Ken and that kitchen that just almost didn't care about the guest experience.
Uh-huh.
And I still think about it. And, you know, the dishes that we did, the environment that we worked in, I'm not even sure if I knew a restaurant was busy or not. I was just so in it. And, you know, one thing that used to happen was on Wednesdays, I kept hearing about the hate box. This hate box would arrive. And I was an extern, so everything scared me at the time. But the hate box would arrive. And then finally on a Wednesday, this big, the size of a coffin, white box shows up with Japanese lettering all over it.
Christ.
And I remember they open it, and it's just this just like cornucopia of shellfish and seafood and Japanese things that I had never seen before. King crab, silver needlefish, all different snappers and mat-eye, and it was incredible. And I'm like, all right, well, why is it called the hate box? And then Chef Ken would roll in and just start delegating tasks to people. And there was no like option. There wasn't like, oh, my prep list is too long. My day is too busy. It was like, you find a way to get this done.
Clean these live eels.
Exactly.
I don't even know what the fuck a live eel is.
Live sea urchins would come in.
Live sea urchins, same
and
thing.
it would be, you know, like, here's a demo.
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
And that's how I learned about the hate box, because it would hem you up and then it would throw your whole day off.
Yeah.
But it was that ability to be nimble. It was the ability to just be fearless and accept that if something didn't hit or didn't work, you move on.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a formula to Clio. It was just excellent. And there wasn't a style to Clio. It was all over the place, and yet it was linear and beautiful at the same time. And I still, to this day, it's the best restaurant in Boston. And they've evolved into Uni now, which is just pure, you know, Japanese concept. And it's still the best restaurant.
Still great.
It's still great.
Yeah. He really has a way with cooking and trends and knowing what's great. Great chef.
Yeah.
Great guy too.
Great guy.
Yeah.
You know, he has the ability to evolve over time, know how to reach different demographics of people, different neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. One of the only guys who can do multiple concepts at a very high level.
Yeah.
Right?
Where's Jamie with him too?
There's Jamie.
Right.
And who's also an incredibly talented chef. And I've been lucky to be friends with him over the years.
Same.
And still uses cookbook today for charcuterie recipes.
Yeah. Great
so,
guy.
yeah.
So what happened after there? You stayed, you did your internship there, and then you bounced, or you stuck around?
Right. So no, I mean, I did my internship, and then with culinary school, you go back to school for a little bit, and you have to finish your degree there. And then I moved to New York City and worked at Per Se.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of the coffee table cookbook culture with the French Laundry. Mm-hmm. And I think me at that age, I was part of a large community of people who all kind of fell in love with the aesthetic, that the Thomas Keller aesthetic that he was delivering, both in the restaurants, both by word of mouth, and then the cookbook came, and then you get there and everything is super polished and like the feeling that you are working at the best.
Definitely.
And nobody did it better at the time. Mm-hmm. And so that was where I wanted to work. And was lucky enough to get a job as a commis right out of culinary school. Yeah. And I remember I moved 6 days after I graduated culinary school and started working there. And I used to stage there on Saturdays on the weekend. I would drive down and do a day stage just to kind of get my foot in the door.
Smart.
Right? And then got the job and worked under Jonathan Beno, another fantastic chef.
Yeah, great guy. What are the things that you learned there that were different from what you have already in your repertoire from Ken?
Procedure was a big part of the Keller way. It's the procedure. It's almost to a point where it's like, don't ask why. It's about, this is how it's been done.
This is how we do it.
Right. And
we make the fish mousse by hand, because the answer he gave me was, what did they do before electricity? Right. Well, we have electricity now, boom, had to make it by hand.
Right.
Commis just kind of stirring while he's throwing creme fraiche and stirring, faster, stir. Fucking hell, man.
Yeah,
yeah. But it was about the procedure.
It's the procedure.
It was about the purity of the technique,
right.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the biggest takeaway from that time there, was just like, this isn't the kind of person I want to be. And that's not to discount the people that come through there, and I'm trying to answer questions without having to walk things back, because I know
absolutely.
I want people to hear this and say, that is a very excellent place to work if that's the kind of person you are. People respond well to procedures, and they respond well to discipline, and they respond well to that black and white style of management. I don't think that was for me. I lived I still do. I live a little more in the gray area. Now, I look for people to hire who work in black and white because it helps me, which is how I view a lot of the people who I work with now. But that is the Keller aesthetic, and that's why it's been pound for pound one of the best for so many years, is that they've been able to kind of have these very strict procedures that don't change.
Yeah, and they deliver.
Yeah. And it's it's cool to follow it over the years, because they still it's the same, and yet it's different.
It's different, right? Yeah. Interesting to see what's going on at the French Laundry now.
For sure.
From when the book came out, which is good to see it evolve.
Is that how you remember that time?
I remember, so I got the job at the French Laundry in 2001. And I really wanted to go work for John George, which we'll talk about in a second. I worked classic French cuisine, like I worked at La Francais with Jean Banchet, which is Bocuse style. It's heavy sauces and butters and reductions. And, I wanted to see something. I wanted to continue to do French cuisine, but I wanted to see something different. I wanted to see some different flavors. And I thought John George had this, he had just opened up Vong in Chicago, and we a couple cooks went there and we ordered the whole fucking menu. And they're like, who the hell are these guys, you know? And it was these Asian flavors and ingredients, and he wasn't scared to use chilies and ginger. And I was really enamored by that kind of like the Asian flavors, the Southwest Japanese, or no idea what I'm talking about. Vietnam, you know, herbs.
The way he layered it.
The way he layers it, you know, it was French cooking was familiar, but it was like really fresh. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was working and I was sending my resume out to a whole bunch of places, and I had called the kitchen of John George, and they answered, and I was like, hey, I want to talk to the chef, please. And they're like, what do you want? I'm like, well, I want to send a resume. And hello, this is the kitchen. And Gabriel Courin answered, this is Gabriel. And, you know, it was probably before service or something. He talked to me. And I'm like, hey, I'm working at this restaurant now in Chicago. And I'm thinking, like, oh, absolutely. We're not hiring now. But, you know, I was like 6 months before I wanted to leave. And please send me your resume. And, you know, where else have you worked? We chatted for a little bit. I thought he was the coolest guy, you know. And then I had sent my resume to French Laundry and like Danielle. And I had started setting up stages. And I never circled back with Gabriel because that was just like in the back pocket kind of thing.
Right.
And the French Laundry called me, and I was like, I gotta go here. It wasn't even a question. It was like, fuck, you know. And I went out there, I did the 2-day stage. And for me, it was one of those moments of, I remember when the book came out, we talked about this before. I remember the book came out, and I was just like, it was like the light bulb went off. Like the pieces of the puzzle that I was looking for in my cooking career of how to work clean and neat, how to be organized, how to be like, you know, label and date things and organize a walk-in cooler so everybody take the butter out of the box, take the eggs out of the box, and, you know, put everything away. Like that was, to me, the most impressive. That was what I was missing. That type of discipline of structure of how to do things on a day-to-day that's going to set you up for the service. You know, have everything here, put your bane in the same spot every time, have your cutting board, have your towel over here. So if you walk down your station blindfold, you know where your salt's at, you know everything. And that's where the puzzle pieces that I was missing when I got there. I was like, I feel like, okay, I'm going to actually learn something here. And then you get your ass kicked for 2 years straight. You come in, and as a commis, I would come in at 5:30 in the morning. I'd look at my prep list and I'd be like, nobody can. If there were 3 people, we wouldn't be able to finish this. Like, how the fuck are you going to finish all this work? And then somehow, some way, you finish it, and they're like, "Oh, wow, you finished all that work!" Like it was almost a joke. Like, yeah, here's the last bit of Brunoise fennel. You know, it's 7:00. I'm gonna go home now. They're like, "Oh, nice job. We didn't think you were gonna finish the list." And the next day, the list was longer.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan could do more work. He did that. He could do more work. You're just like, and then eventually they're like, "Okay, we're taking you out of this position because we need you somewhere else, and we know you can do it." And then you're back. Now you're working as a chef de partie, back at it where the lists are longer, but they're more intricate. And now you have to finish this list, and then you have to cook. You're just like, it just never ends, you know?
You know, it almost feels like we are the last of the Mohicans.
I agree.
And I don't know if that's a topic that you've touched on, and it certainly deviates from this, but it almost seems like that is gone.
Yeah.
Or at least it's fading into the background because of so many other
social issues and everything, like the lack of people getting into the industry, the pay, the pressure, the treatment.
Right. And for us,
it was normal life.
It was never about color or sex, or it was just about the work.
Just do the job.
And there was something beautiful and pure about it that has somehow gotten covered up to a degree. And, you know, I think there's a small collection of people in my life, and you're one of them, that we can just bond over that.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe that's what's, you know, made our relationship what it is over the years. Is that, like, I know that you've been through it.
Right, yeah.
And I think you know that I've been through it. And, you know, look, a year can go by and we won't talk, and then I know that you'll hit me up, and it's just like we'll pick it up like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's something very special about some of those people in my life.
Mm-hmm. We're veterans.
You know, it
almost how was your tour? French Laundry, 2001 to 2003. We lost a lot of good men that day. You know? It's like, fuck. How about you, John George? You know? Yeah.
That's funny.
So where did you go after Per Se then? How were you feeling when you left Per Se? Like,
great question.
Yeah.
Not motivated to be in kitchens. Now,
but also, and I don't want to say not smart enough, but not intuitive enough to realize, because you're still young, you're in your 20s.
Correct.
Not intuitive enough to realize, hey, that didn't work and it's not for me, and that's okay.
Right.
You
that's the preface.
Yes.
Is like, all right, I'm young. I made some mistakes. I don't have the war stories. Like, it's not like in my life I've taken these like, oftentimes the most interesting people are the ones who have come from something very dark and dismal. I didn't come from that. I know that I'm privileged, and I've had a great life, and I love my life. That was a piece where something got uncovered where I was like, this isn't what I want to do. But I had enough support systems around me and I had people pushing me, that I knew I had to get moving. And that was one thing my father always taught me, was don't quit a job without something lined up.
Yeah, correct. That's like a very baby boomer thing, Yeah.
You
got health insurance? Okay, yeah.
Well, you can't. I mean, now it does, I guess that advice is not...
Well, yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. Right?
I say it all the time. I'm not sure people hear me.
Yeah.
So I felt confused, I guess. And I remember going to Jonathan Beno and saying I was unhappy, and he did me a solid that a lot of chefs I don't think would do. He allowed me to take 2 weeks off and go shop around for something that I wanted to do, and if I didn't find something, he said I could come back to Per Se.
If you didn't find something.
If I didn't find something. So I did a couple different random interviews. Like, I interviewed with Houston's to be a front of the house manager.
Were you that broken?
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
And I remember I went to Tabla at the time, and I loved Bread Bar, which was one of my favorite restaurants in New York City, which was the little cafe attached to Tabla.
Right.
And then I went to Perry Street, which was a restaurant that hadn't opened yet.
Right.
By John George. And I walked in, and it was like this tiny little version of the Per Se kitchen. I almost felt like you're on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
Everything was just super tight and brand new and stainless everywhere, and like very shiny.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like, this is cool. And I met the team there, and that's when things began to click. I think I found my community of people who believed in discipline and structure, but also weren't scared to say, I don't know, and weren't too structured in their way to explain something to me. And I remember that being a beautiful moment when they were teaching me and explaining things to me. And I was like, this never happened to me in the last year. Also,
smaller kitchen, you felt a little more safe. You didn't feel like you're a number. You didn't feel like you got lost in the crowd.
Right.
That's, I think that's important.
It was just, it was one of those things that was right place, right time. And it turned my life in different direction. And I'm forever grateful for that year of working at
You got your confidence back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right on. How long were you there for?
About a year.
Yeah. I ate there twice when it first opened.
Yeah.
It was fucking great.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was a great restaurant. Still great. For me, it was a bit of a feeder program to something bigger.
Right.
At the time, I didn't realize it. I was just kind of in that world and happy. 20-something-year-old kid cooking in downtown New York City is a lot of fun.
Right.
You start to really...
At a hip, trendy, delicious restaurant.
Right.
Too. Yeah.
And you start to form some friendships that I still have to this day. Some people that I still look to as mentors to this day, all from that one little restaurant.
Right. So where did you work? What station did you work? What do you remember specifically about the kitchen where... You're at Per Se. It's very organized and structured and militant. And now you go to Prairie Street and you're on the station and you're like, what's the aha moment of like, okay, this is where it's at? Like, you've made a dish, obviously they're explaining things to you and taking you by the hand and showing how to do things, but was there a moment where during service or you're making a dish or you tasted something and you're like, fuck, this is where I need to be?
It's funny, the biggest moment that I think back on isn't about the food. It was the fact that the chef of the restaurant was on the line with the cooks. And he expedited, he called the tickets, and worked the middle station of the restaurant at the same time. And I hadn't seen that before. I came from a couple different brigades. But I never worked in a kitchen where the head number one guy was on the line. Mm-hmm. And so everything kind of flowed out this through the middle. And his eyes and oftentimes his hands and his knife touched everything.
Yeah.
And that, I think that created a bond that, I wasn't familiar with. I just didn't think that world existed where like the chef and the entry level cook could kind of be on the same plane.
Let me see epitome of lead by example.
Right.
I'm not even going to lead by example. I'm going to be here as the example.
He would, he would carve the proteins. So he had a little 18-inch cutting board in front of him, printer, expediting rail, and he had his like little knife, and he would carve all the proteins and do a lot of finishes, call checks, still show discipline, still send plates back to cooks. I worked Hot Apps to start, which is this station that is this hybrid between appetizers and fryables, things that went in the fry later.
Yeah. Probably maybe a pasta dish on station.
Yeah, like a dumpling dish.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. It was, it's always been this hybrid station that kind of danced between cold dishes, appetizers, entrees. It kind of almost becomes the bridge for a lot of kitchens, is that Hot App station. And then I was able to work my way through the whole kitchen line. And I think that was one of the first times where I felt like I understood the seasons, because I was able to see a full circle of seasons, which a lot of people don't get to see these days. And you actually get to see it come through. You see a tomato begin and end. Right. And there wasn't a dish. I remember. I hope the chef who hired me hears this, because he's the one who created this dish. I remember he plated a dish.
What's his name?
Greg Vernick.
Oh, Greg Vernick. Yeah. He's still with the John George Company.
Yeah. And he's my mentor, but he's also a lot of people's mentor. And to this day, he is a huge piece of my life. But he made a dish, and it had like 3 pieces on it. It was a fennel cream, a piece of poached halibut, like very gently poached before combination ovens, just low oven, olive oil poached, and then pickled peppers on top. And they were pickled with a ton of fresh thyme. It's a very floral pickle. And that was it. And that was the dish.
Yeah.
And he was like, eat it. And I remember thinking, like, this seems so different from what I was doing at Per Se, when I didn't even know what the finished dish looked like.
Yeah.
Right?
You're just making stuff.
You're doing a piece of a dish that you know is going to end up somewhere great.
Right. Yeah.
You're doing the mirepoix or the brunoise or whatnot, but you never really see it end.
Mm-hmm. You never taste it.
You never taste it end. Right. And here I'm eating this whole thing, and he's talking me through it in his like weird Shakespearean way. And it was incredible. And I was like, wait a minute, all that flavor comes from just 3 components on a plate,
right?
And the whole script was flipped. And in a lot of ways that's JG, and that's sort of his ethos. People label him all different ways at this point, whether it's like the fusion world or the layering of French and Asian, but in a lot of ways it's a very stripped down, clean approach.
Simplistic.
Yeah.
I mean, his book is called Simple.
Yeah.
It's very, I always said it's very difficult to cook simple food. And that's why I think, like, especially Italy, when you have three ingredients max, there's nowhere to hide. You're not hiding behind shaved truffles and foie gras, oysters and vinegar. You have these three ingredients. And if any cooking steps along the way gets fucked up, there's nowhere to hide. You're going to see it.
Right.
You know, and that's, I think, John
100%.
George's cooking. I think your cooking is also like that. You know, I could see the influence, especially from John George, of that simple approach, the little piece of crunchy salt that's going to make the whole dish. You know, always your things on bread are always, it's the first thing I look at. It's like the scallop we had the other night. It was just like, I would have never thought to put, you know, me, it's like raw scallops on a plate, olive oil. I would have never thought to put on bread. And I put it in front of us and you take a bite, you get the crispy, yeasty bread. It's a little bit charred and toasted, and you bite into like, the scallop was a little bit warmed also, which is really pleasant, and a little bit of olive oil, and it was just like the textures are beautiful. I was like, this is fucking genius.
Thanks,
you know.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's certainly not my playbook, and I think it's taken me a lot of years to accept the fact that I didn't write this book.
Well, none of us wrote any books.
But I think when you're young, especially when you're trying to open up your own shop, it's this inner demon that is telling you you have to find your thing. Yeah. You have to find your personality as a chef. You know, you have to find your style. And you go through this identity crisis in the beginning, and ultimately, I think what turns people into great chefs is them getting themselves out of that and just accepting that some things are just fucking delicious, right? So what that it came from this person or that person, right? Like, there's so much conversation about competition, and this is where I love you, by the way. So let me get to this for a second. Let me get to my point. There's so much conversation about comparison and competition, and when you're going out to dinner, you're like, oh, that was good, but, and like, you know, this could have used that, but. And I think as I've gotten older, I've become just more of a fan. And you've always been a fan. Yeah. You know, ever since I met you, you know, 10 years ago, you know, you were a fan, and you came to the restaurant with a way about you that you weren't there to judge what I was doing. You weren't there to like look at ideas. You were there to have a good time. Yeah. And I remember the first time you were there, you sat across from us in the kitchen, and you just had a good time. And there needs to be more of that with chefs and with the industry. And so, look, if you're going to stay on that path, I'm on board with you, because I've become more of just a fan of what people do. And I don't now draw comparisons as much as I'm like, this was cool, this was fun, I had a good time. Yeah. Did the food hit? Maybe not, maybe. So what? Did you have a good time? That's what was important. Right.
I look at it like, especially when I find like a new restaurant that's new to me, or like a young chef, I find it like I discovered a new band. And it's like, oh, dude, you gotta hear this. You gotta go and check this out. I had an amazing experience with this restaurant. And then I go back and I wanna see how they evolve. What I really like to see, and kind of why we started the whole podcast, was I like to see, and I'm curious about the family tree of people. And that's why the whole podcast kind of comes from like an origin story of like, where were you? Who was in the kitchen? What year was this? How did it evolve? And what are you doing now? And when you go back and you look at, especially like the older, so you look at like Danielle and some of these older guys, you're like, fuck, man, he was here and he was there and this guy was there, and they all kind of know each other. And you start putting all these pieces together. I think that's super interesting. But when you look at the end product and say, you can see a little bit of influence from this guy, a little bit of influence from this guy, and it's not copying or mimicking, it's influence. Like, this is how they cut the fish, this is how they treated the product, you know? And then you look at that end result, and it's like a morph between all these great places that you worked, and this is my final product of what I created my own cuisine out of my own experiences. And to me, that is the best thing to taste and the best thing to experience. And I get excited when I find a new place or I'm in a new city, and then I go there every fucking weekend until I'm done eating the menu, and then I start telling other people to go there. And that's definitely what happened with you. It has happened with a bunch of restaurants and stuff. But
well, let me. I know you know this, but let me just double that down, because the people listening need to know how important it is to cook for the industry. Yeah. And the value of that. And when people are opening their restaurants, especially chefs who are looking to, I don't know what the phrase is, I'm thinking like where it's not a gimmicky restaurant, which is fine. There's a place for that, where it's not a theme or concept. It's just a good restaurant.
Yeah.
The two big pieces that we always talk about are the neighborhood that you're in and the industry. Mm-hmm. And if you can you can find a way to attract those two groups, a lot of things fall in place after that. And having your support 10 years ago, especially from a chef who's from another market, was huge for us.
Yeah.
You know, and like we set out to do a restaurant that people in the industry wanted to go to on their days off. Like that's how we wrote it down. And it seems like the regular civilians, those who aren't in our business, they listen to the industry.
Yeah.
However,
100%.
I don't know how they do it. Now it's through social, word of mouth,
yeah,
everything in between. But their voice has value. So you need to find a way to get their voice into your place.
That's great advice. Yeah, I agree. Right on. So what happened after Perry Street? Good to go back.
Okay, so towards my year, I remember I went to, and again, I have to preface this, I don't have these war stories. I don't have this dark, dismal underbelly.
Sorry, make something up. Nobody cares.
No, but I don't have the Anthony Bourdain,
right.
Which is the romantic side of our business. A lot of people have got to find their way, right. And often it happens through some trials and tribulations. And
so let's go on a side mission real fast. I'm glad you brought that up. I read Kitchen Confidential, and I barely finished it. And I was so excited when it came out because I thought this was going to be a cookbook for me. I was in my 20s. I thought this could be something I'd share with my friends, be like, this is what I'm doing. And I didn't relate to it, hardly. There was a lot of drinking and heroin use and chefs making up menus on New Year's Eve when he came in at 3 o'clock. And I was already working in like the French Laundry and stuff. I was already on this road to like, you know, the serious about my career and stuff, and I didn't really relate that much to it. I related more to him after when he started the shows and when he started to speak, and he would start to tell stories of the industry, and he became such a voice in the industry for young cooks to try to help explain to their family what the fuck they're doing. Right. He was that guy. But that book, I was like, like it didn't give me what I thought it was going to give me when I first started reading it. You know?
I think you're the minority.
I am the minority.
Right.
I know. Like I tell people that, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" You know.
Right.
So,
I could relate. I had spent, again, a lot of my life in kitchens. So I remember being able to just click into that world when I was reading it. But it doesn't. Again, it doesn't paint our industry in the best light, which makes sometimes the best stories. Correct. And the best conversations. Right. And I don't have that. Like I went to Perry Street. I did my time there. I went to the chef at the time. I said, I'm ready to move on. And he said, okay, why don't you start going up to John George and helping out on, before work? Cause I didn't have to be in work until 2. So I would go to JG at 11 or 12 and help prep the lunch service with the lunch crew at JG. Met some super important people up there. And I did that for a few months, almost 6 months. And then when the time came, when the position at Jean George opened up, they offered it to me and I moved uptown. So, and I already had a little bit of a foundation built because I knew my way around the kitchen. I knew where everything was. I knew some of the base foundation things that needed to get done for service, whatever I had to do.
The systems, like some of the systems from Perry Street were the same systems that they were using, or was it completely different?
It was different and the same, but I had some reps up there.
Yeah.
So I had done some prep projects, this. Sometimes when you have a person who's in your kitchen for the first time, it's just a day or two to get them into their bearings.
Yeah.
Where's the bathroom? Where are the hotel pans? Right. What's the language of this kitchen?
Yeah.
And so I had that already, and so I moved up to John George and became this position called the tournade, which is the rounds cook. It's a fancier word for the roundsman, and I would cover stations while people were on vacation, and it was incredibly hard, and But yeah, I mean, that's when I started to kind of feel like, all right, I'm potentially getting towards, maybe I'm a little ahead of myself, but I'm potentially getting towards, chefdom here. Like I feel like I'm on par with some of these sous chefs.
Right.
Like I feel like I'm seeing eye to eye with them.
When you could walk on any station at any time and handle it, you're there.
And that's kind of what happened at Jean Georges. It was very hard, and it was it still is a very big operation.
It's huge.
It's got a lot of moving parts. And it's so well orchestrated. But yeah, that I went there, and that was kind of the beginning of my run as a sous chef into, I guess now.
Yeah.
And a lot has a lot's happened in between, but that was kind of where I remember. Here's the point. I remember when they promoted me to sous chef, they sat me down and they said, it's not against the rules to hang out with the line cooks after work. You're allowed to, but you have to be careful. You have to be careful about that line, because you don't want to go out with the line cook after work, have too good of a time, and then turn around the next day and have to manage them, because that becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
And so I knew right away that like I needed to kind of
read between the lines, man. Yeah.
We're
not telling you can't do this, but yeah.
But I think you've had that. I think we've all had that kind of crossroad moment where you're like, all right, well, I guess my partying days are over,
right?
Or at least they've got to change,
or I got to find new friends,
right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. I kind of, I don't know if I stopped partying at the time, but I definitely changed, my circle of people.
It gets lonely, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
It does.
So how was being a sous chef at Jean Georges?
I really think it was great. It was a long run, and there was a lot of ups and downs, and I can't pinpoint because it was it was a 3.5 year stretch, maybe 4 year stretch. The one thing I loved about being a sous chef, especially in a big house like JG, is that there was a lot of motion. Things were very fluid, so I never felt bored in the JG world ever. Even to this day, when I'm around him, I never feel bored. He's always just energetic, and he's always exciting, and that always transfers onto them and their group and their chefs. And so that's how I remember it. I remember it was like I would do a year, and then in one kind of sous chef role, and then my scope of work would change, and they would move me to the Nougatine, and I would be overseeing a cafe for a year. And then I would move back upstairs and be part of the tasting menu.
That's great experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, all these really exciting things happened in between. For example, the Michelin Guide came out. And, I was able to be part of a crew that earned 3 Michelin stars.
Yeah.
And I have very clear memories of the things that were done in order to become a Michelin at that time. Remember, this is 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So, and other restaurants opened. So I was able to see him open restaurants. And then I was able to go on the road and help him open restaurants, which maybe was the most important piece of the whole thing, was that I became a fly on the wall. And maybe I'm fast forwarding too much. So if you have to...
No. I'll pull us back in.
If you have to pull me back, but I became a fly on the wall of how to open a restaurant. And I did it over and over again. And every time we did it, we got a little bit better. And, you were going from plans on paper to a construction site, to a finished kitchen, to an outfitted kitchen. And, I knew that I had almost a unicorn opportunity. And I think that had I not done that, I might not be where I am now.
Right. Well, I don't know. That's a great, interesting point, because I think a guy like you would have figured it out somehow. The road would have been different. The vehicle, maybe you would have taken a bicycle to get to that point, or maybe you're taking a Lamborghini. But I feel like a guy like you with the mindset would have figured it out somehow. I feel like that experience fast-tracked it, and it was a crash course education in how to build a restaurant from ground up with one of the best restaurateurs, the world's ever seen. So
well, let me ask you this question. Sorry to interrupt. Would you ever recommend to someone to open a restaurant without having opened a restaurant
absolutely
in
not.
the past?
Absolutely not. No way. Zero. Absolutely not. And I'm going through it now, and there's so many. I mean, I've been doing this a while, and I feel like I'm a pretty savvy guy in the industry. I built a lot of restaurants. I've been the chef of a lot of restaurants, but building it from the ground up with your own money, there's so many things that I didn't even know existed that I'm running into like problems with. And now I'm just calling friends like, what do you do about this? Like, oh, well, I got X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I felt like I was finally ready at 45. Like, I don't want to work for anybody else. I got my brother. We're the dynamic duo. We can do this. We know how to make profitable restaurants. We can fucking do this. And now I'm in the middle of it like, fuck, I had no idea, And I definitely don't think I know everything, or I've definitely seen a lot, but I'm surprised at how much that I didn't know is involved in everything leading up to the day construction starts. And I've always been on the teams after construction or construction's going on, like, oh, we need a chef. Orion's the chef, and you're the chef partner now, and like the kitchen's already built. Here's the hood. Like, organize the kitchen however you want, right. But this is the 300 square foot that you have for the kitchen. Okay, great, no problem. It's super easy. Going into rubble in a space that's just cement walls and a torn up ground. Where do you want the kitchen to be? I have no fucking idea. I don't know. If we put it here, and then you start second guessing, well, maybe it should go over here. Maybe it's like, now we're stuck with it. Like, this better work.
Oh, it's going to work.
Yeah, it's going to work. Yeah. Well, I mean, you put me in a box, I'll put me in a room and I'll figure out how to make dinner.
Right.
Whether the kitchen's here or there. But there's so many questions and second guessing and third guessing myself. Oh, fuck. Did I put this the right way? Did I order enough equipment? Did I order too much equipment? Did I spend too much money here? It's like, you can't think about it, man.
You can't. And the answer is all of the above. You everything is going to be okay and everything's wrong at the same time. Right. And it's just how you roll with it. You're nimble enough. You're going to make it work. Right. Right. And you've got, we talk about it. You almost build up a crust on your skin. Like, you're not gonna knock me down. Right. I'm too strong.
Well, you're not going to knock me down. I'm going to see the punch coming, and it might hit me, but I'm already going to be thinking of other ways to pivot that are not going to affect the business. Right. So
we call them the oh shits of the day. That's how we start our day. What are the oh shits? Like, nobody wakes up to good news.
Yeah.
So
everything's great. Don't come in today. No problem. Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
the good news doesn't come until after 1 o'clock. Right. So it's like, what are the oh shits of the day? And year after year, that doesn't change. You're still going to wake up to oh shits, right? Year 1, year 10, different oh shits, but you still have them, and you still have to be able to make those decisions, some on the fly, some over time, some we say are happening in sequence, some happen simultaneously, but it's the same.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're gonna get through it, and you're gonna hit a home run because of who you are, because of where you've come from.
Thank you.
I remember doing an event with you, talking about less is more. I think I've told you this a couple times, and I've tried to do this, but you did a beef dish in Chicago. We did a dinner, probably a beard event.
On the hotel.
At a hotel, at the hotel, yeah. And you were with Catbird Seat, and you came with your crew, and you had these little turnips, these little baby turnips in a jar. And you sauteed them in butter. They were just fermented turnips in butter, and it was like one of the best bites of food. It was such a great dish, and I remember thinking, like, here's an example of what I love about food. This guy is putting like 3 or 4 things on the plate, really good beef. Can't remember what the sauce was. These fermented turnips that you guys walked me through happily. Right. And that's another cool thing about this kind of family thing that we have, is that you guys walked me through it, and just thinking how delicious these fermented turnips are.
Yeah. Simplicity. Goes back to the poached
so
halibut.
Flavor.
Poached halibut with fennel puree and peppers. Like,
remember that dish?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. It was smoked tofu,
So good.
ribeye that we crusted in like some seaweed, smoked tofu,
Yes.
and
That's
turnips and butter.
It was so good, man.
Yeah. So you opened up. You want to open your own restaurant?
Okay, right. So I'm on the road.
Yeah.
I'm working kind of as this task force chef, where I was helping different hotels open up their JG concept restaurant. A lot of it was just me being a fly on the wall. I wasn't high up on the food pyramid. I was just a chef trainer, helping things like let's get the opening inventory in, let's get the opening dry goods, what's our opening produce, where are the stations going to go, and how is it going to flow. And we would arrive 2 months prior to an opening, some cases 1 month, and it was crazy. You'd work every day, 12 hours a day, just grinding it out. But it was so much fun because in some cases I'm in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Other times I'm in, Boston, Deer Valley, just these really cool locations. But, you slowly, and I'm not the only one, because there's a couple other friends of mine who now have restaurants who have done, similar path. You slowly realize that, you're seeing the playbook play out live in front of you. And it's like, all right, well, maybe,
Right.
just maybe there's a chance if I can.
You're in Boston, you're in the Middle East, you're in New York, you're in Las Vegas, and the playbook's the same.
Playbook's the same.
No matter if it's a hotel, a casino, a freestanding restaurant, the players change a little bit, but the playbook's the same. And that's the realization of like, I can fucking do this.
And the good ones, and the really good ones, just get better.
Yeah.
They don't go stale.
Mm-hmm.
They don't go boring. They get better. And so we went from Vancouver to Doha, and then from Doha to Boston, and then from Boston to Deer Valley. And each one, I felt like we got a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of becomes, it plants something inside of you that says, all right, if I can get this opportunity, I think I could do something with it.
Yeah. And then what happened after that?
So we were living in New York City, and a lot of this kind of turns personal because I wanted to get married and have a family. And, I remember Julie, my wife, and I were both kind of pretty motivated that we didn't want to stay in New York City long term. And I love New York, and it's not, plenty of people raise families in Manhattan. Right. It just wasn't in the cards for us. We were crossing ships in the night. She was working during the day. I was at night. It was tough. We were in that world. I think a lot of us have been there. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what started the conversation of let's do our own thing, or let's relocate. And so it kind of turned into a conversation about where should we relocate, and if so, what should we do? Mm-hmm. And Philadelphia has always been home for me, and this is the third city I've lived in long term. We lived in Boston and New York and now Philly, but it's always been home. So for me, I always wanted it, but I never wanted to push it on her. Yeah. And we would start coming down here, going out to dinner. My family always had a good pulse on the city, what the next Steven Starr restaurant was going to be, right? And so we always kind of would come down for a holiday weekend and go out to dinner, or go out for drinks, had a good time. And I remember it was a matter of, do we stay with JG? And I had an opportunity to relocate to upstate New York, where he has an inn. Mm-hmm. I think it's called the Inn at Pound Ridge.
Pound Ridge, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. I had an opportunity to go there, which kind of checked off a couple of our boxes. It got us out of the city. It was like, all right, we can settle down, put some roots down, start a family. Or we can leave and try and open up our own shop. And we chose the latter. Yeah. And the first thing we did was we got my parents involved, and we hired a consultant. And that was the first big investment we made, was we hired this consultant for like a 5 or 6 hour class on the dollars and cents of owning a restaurant. I think that's what it was called. The guy's name was Harris Eckstud. He's still out there. Look him up. He's great. And we hired this guy to kind of walk us through everything we didn't know. And mind you, I knew a good amount.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything.
Yeah, correct. Same. I'm in the same boat.
I didn't know anything. And then, you start walking through the economics. One of the first things he asked was, well, what do you guys want to do? And I said, well, I really love the BYOB culture in Philly, these 25, 35 seat restaurants, husbands in the kitchen, wives at the front.
Romantic.
Yeah. A cook, maybe two, a dishwasher, small menu, get our name out there, and, maybe build something from there. And his response was, don't do that.
It's a fucking stupid idea, kid. Smoking a cigar.
Right. Right. Like, he said, if you can acquire a liquor license, then you should. Mm-hmm. And so that became a springboard for us to think a little bit bigger, in a couple, I guess a lot bigger, because we ended up in a much bigger space than we had anticipated. But, in order to make the economics work long term, it's tough with a small restaurant. And you know that.
I do.
How many is there going to be?
I think it's going to be 70 seats total with a patio that we're going to not seat, but we're going to have like lounge chairs. So it'll be like a drinking patio, maybe be a little bit open a little bit later.
Right.
With us, when we started thinking about it, when you came up, how are we on time? Good? Yeah.
We're good.
When we came up, it was, I started cooking in 95, right out of high school. It was work for the best chefs you can, and then you're going to own your own restaurant. Eventually, there's to own your own restaurant, and that's it. And then the Food Network came out, and then TV came out, and then it was, own your own restaurant, and also maybe own a bistro too. So have like a fine dining restaurant, and then have like something casual. And then it became have that casual restaurant, and then a cookbook, and then a line of pans, and then a TV show, and then another restaurant, and then go to Vegas. And it just became this jumble of, I don't really know.
Isn't that sad?
It's yeah. It puts pressure where it doesn't need to go. And I love John George. He's one of my favorite chefs. I had so many inspiring meals. Like I ate at Vong when it just opened in Chicago, and I was like, this is fucking ridiculous, man. But he's one of these guys to blame, man. You look at like who are the successful chefs? Gordon Ramsay has 30 restaurants. John George, all around the world. You're just like, well, this is what I need to do. And I think we really kind of pulled it back, and now it's post-pandemic, all this stuff, but you just can't have a restaurant that serves good food and be successful. So we looked at it like, well, what else can we do? We're making pasta. So we want to sell the pasta outside the restaurant and have what passive income, whatever the fuck they call it, but here's another revenue center that we have. Okay, let's put a small little market in the front. It'll be a host stand. We'll get a glass case with pasta in there. And you walk in and you have all these mounds of pasta, and we'll sell sauces, and you could buy a bunch of pasta if you want to just cook at home, and you could just cook it at home and take it to go. And then we're like, okay, well, why don't we do pasta subscriptions where you subscribe for X amount of dollars a month. You're going to get things that we're testing, things we're working on, outside the box stuff, things nobody else is going to get, things we're not going to serve in the restaurant. I think that's appealing. And then we're going to do pasta classes because there's bachelorette parties. So we have all these and then wholesale to other restaurants of our pasta. So there's not just, you have your restaurant, every once in a while we do a guest chef dinner, we have all these revenue centers that aren't going to cost us much more in labor. And I wanted it to be a small restaurant. We were looking for 2,000 square feet. And the maximum. And it's hard to find, there's no second gen spaces in Nashville. They just tear everything down and build it back up.
Got it.
And a couple of my investors were like, listen, dude, it's got to be bigger. Like day one you open, you're going to max out, and that's what you're going to be doing for the next 10 years, no matter what. So if you get a little bit bigger of a space and then grow into it, you're going to get really clever with where you're going to be able to put tables and how you're going to be able to do things. And I think it was the right decision. I still think it's a little too big. It's about 65 seats with the PDR. I still think it's a little too big, but we don't have to open with that. We could open with 50 seats and grow into it,
So are you planning to have all these layers on day one?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely fucking not. No way.
Yeah, because that when you were going through that whole glass case pasta, outdoor, indoor, I started to
same.
I started to get a little.
I'm overwhelmed.
agita.
Completely overwhelmed.
Yeah,
but like
as long as you have the ability to stagger.
Yeah.
Like it's like, do you open a restaurant and just do you open the restaurant and do lunch and dinner on day one?
No,
never.
Fuck no. Right.
It's tough.
Right. So I think the market is like, it's this wild card of it. We hope it's super successful. In the business plan, we left it as like a couple $100 of transactions a day, and we're just kind of like waiting to see. So when we open, we're just going to be selling the pasta that we make, put it in the case with the sauces that we make for service. So it's going to be really no extra work. Might get some cheeses around, and then we have plans to like in the future like bottle sauces and all all this other shit. But in the beginning, it's going to be a very bare bones. Let's get the place open. Let's get the staff solidified. Let's figure out our voice of who we want to be, and then slowly start to add these little things on. A pasta class on the weekend, super fucking easy. I could do that, no problem. This pasta subscriptions, it's going to take a little bit more coaxing and massaging to kind of like, well, what's this going to look like? That's going to be marketing meetings. We're going to have to get special boxes. There's going to have to be an online presence. So that's kind of back burner. But these are the things that we're thinking about that we want to have for the restaurant, because you just can't say we're open 5 days a week, we just serve dinner, and we're expecting to pay our investors back.
Doesn't work.
So, yeah.
Well, on the positive side, you have a great following, especially in that region.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you kicked ass with Catbird
Yeah.
Seat. We all loved it. I can imagine people being very, very excited to have you guys there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great.
Yeah.
I really do. Yeah. Right on. How are we on time? Are you okay?
We're great, man.
Yeah.
We're great.
So tell me about the consultant you hired and what you didn't know.
Harris Extud was a good guy. It came down to the just simple economics of like the understanding the percentages. And I'm not a numbers guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a math guy. I never claimed to be. I'm certainly not the smartest guy in my business. I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by people way smarter than me. But it's just understanding how much debt can you afford to pay out, right? It's like, what is your rent and debt service going to be? And what percentage of your total revenue is that number? What's that happy landing spot? And so that's kind of how we carved our classroom out, is just understanding the economics, top line, bottom line, which, to some cases, bottom line becomes a laughable conversation in the beginning. But even to this day, understanding of the top line, how much goes to staff, how much goes to food, right?
Yeah.
How much goes to your rent and debt service, and then, all right, well, what the hell's left over?
Mm-hmm.
And that became the conversation.
Yeah. Is it worth it?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't recommend people doing it now because times are a little weird. Like, you're elbow deep in it.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone were to come to me and say, I want to open up my own shop now with a liquor license and freestanding, not part of a hotel, I'd probably tell them to wait until things level out a little bit. It seems like, from what I'm hearing, it's taking a long time to get things built. Bidding out construction is a big process.
Yeah. Huge.
The lead time on kitchen equipment is a little challenging.
Yeah.
The price of food is a little challenging. Now, we can always navigate, but I think at some point the pendulum will swing a little bit more in our favor, and then we can be off and running a little bit more.
I think it's such an amazing time, maybe the best time to own a restaurant up and running, because everybody's going out to eat. Everybody's paying. You can't get a reservation last minute anywhere anymore. But to open it is not the best time.
It's taxing.
It's not the best time. If it's up and running, then you're doing great. But to get to that point, it's a lot harder than it was 3-4 years ago.
I think so.
It's way harder.
I think so, man. Yeah. I mean, I do feel optimistic about it will swing in our favor. I just don't know when.
Right.
Obviously, we all want it to be sooner. We're paying a lot of money. Things are costing a lot more than I think they should. I think it's gone up really fast, and you can't necessarily translate that to the check price for the guest. So you find yourself walking this tightrope of, perceived value.
Correct.
Is the guest getting, their money's worth?
Well, that's why I think like chefs have always been clever.
Great,
lobster's expensive. Great, let's find something else. Great, monkfish.
Right.
Right. Now monkfish is expensive. Well, let's go back to lobster. We're not using these high-end cuts. Let's use lamb neck.
Right.
And
now more than ever, any nice protein that you purchase for your menu, you almost need 2 applications for.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I come from that world, but now it's like almost you have to.
It's expected.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you're putting tuna on the menu, you're having 2 tuna preparations, and you've got to find a way to fit it into your menu.
Yeah, I agree.
Same thing with something like lobster or beef. I mean, you're constantly looking at your first preparation, and then what is going to be something you potentially preserve, right? And then maybe special it or charcuterie it.
Yep.
Or freeze it and start building up a stockpile, and then building something from your freezer pile. It's almost required.
Yeah, I agree.
With what costs are at right now.
Yeah. So you did the consulting. After that, you still wanted to open a restaurant.
And then it came down to real estate, right? And then it comes down to start looking at spaces once you understand your budget.
Do you have investors or?
It was it was me and Julie, my mom and my dad, and then the banks. And so we ran it really close to the chest. We opened with IKEA plates. The kitchen equipment was almost all used. Everything was aluminum. We couldn't afford stainless.
Yeah.
We made it work. But yeah, we started looking at real estate. I was still up in New York at the time, so I would come down on days off. And, we'd look at a space, we'd walk through it, go through it. It's kind of, everybody wants to fast forward to that piece right there. It's I'm going to go look at some spaces, right?
The fun part.
Right, it's the fun part. Then you go through the bidding process, which is hectic and not fun again. So it was about, I'd say 6 months to 8 months of kind of back and forth with understanding the real estate market. And we found 2031 Walnut Street. My mother actually found it, which was really cool. She found it. I wasn't really looking in that zone, like west of Rittenhouse Square. Back then there wasn't much on my side. It was, if you look at Walnut Street, where Vernick Food and Drink is, there was a pot shop, a sex shop, and like a hand reader.
Yeah.
What's that? Like a
tarot reader.
Tarot reader.
Right, yeah.
Right. And that was the block we were on. But my mother would, she would hang out there, and she would stand there and be like, "Look at all this foot traffic." And there was just a lot of young people walking back and forth all day, and it was people in like yoga going to yoga, and then it was a lot of students going back and forth, and then you'd see people at 5 o'clock in their suits and professional attire, and we slowly kind of grew attracted to this zone because there was a lot of people living right by there, and it wasn't the splashy Rittenhouse Square that people expected a restaurant to be, but it still had the foot traffic and it still had that neighborhood vibe. And so that's kind of, then that's when we went for it. And it was a restaurant that started to get built as a partnership, a Mexican restaurant. Prior to that, it was a bookstore. So it had really interesting bones, a bit of a square peg in a round hole scenario. Which
the loft is really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
It's cool, and it's also a pain in the ass.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. I'm sure you like it for the revenue, and I'm sure you don't like it in the middle of summer when you can't keep it cold enough.
And soundproofing.
Yeah.
But, look, it was, I still love the space, and, part of what makes it great is that it's a little charming. It doesn't feel like a vanilla box.
Yeah, it's broken up.
Right. It's got all these random rooms, and it kind of has different layers to it. And I think that's what makes it, have its neighborhood feel. And people come in and they request different rooms, which is always fun.
Yeah.
And they'll say goodbye to me one night and they'll be like, "I'm upstairs next week, but I'll be back the week after that." And that's really cool.
Yeah.
It became. Then you get into once you get the real estate process, there's, again, I go back to this conversation about certain things happen in sequence. You have to wait for one thing to get finished before you move on to the next thing. And then some things you can manage simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly the order that we went in, but there is the finding of the general contractor, there is the architectural plans, the engineer, there's the liquor license and liquor license attorney, there's the business license. So you have all these different, there's zoning and the zoning board, then there's the residents association. So there's all these steps that you have to go through, and some things you can do at the same time, and then most of them you have to wait. Can we put the down payment on the general contractor? No, because our liquor license is still not fully gone through yet. We think it's going to go through. We feel good about it, but we're waiting for that. So there's a lot of, I think you're probably in that now.
Same boat, yeah.
Are you in that, you're in that place?
Yeah, liquor license is a little bit different. Thank God. I'm used to Chicago, and I called the liquor attorney months ago, maybe in April. And I was like, hey, she's like, when's it going to open? I'm like, maybe like spring 2023. She's like, honey, call me a month before you open.
Really?
And I'm like, well, in Chicago, it's like 8 months maybe, and you can't do anything. And I'm sure it's the same here. It's like in Chicago, it's like they have your opening order on a truck that's parked in front of the restaurant, and they're waiting for City Hall to process it. And you're ready to do your first friends and family. And because you think it's getting processed on that day, and then at like 4:30 they process it, and then they start bringing the alcohol, and then they bring it in, and people are in the dining room sitting down. That's how it goes in Chicago.
They just run it super tight.
That's how, and it's how it is. It takes fucking forever. It takes forever to get it. You have to hire an expediter to expedite the papers for you, and you're paying this guy for some reason.
Same.
And it's just like, well, we're gonna get it today. We might get it tonight. And there's times where it's like you didn't get it, and you tell everybody like, the friends and family's off, like we didn't, or you just whatever, you go to the liquor store and you just bring your own. So I mean, I'm in the South, I'm in Tennessee. She's like, honey, this is not Chicago. You call me like a month before, and we'll get everything set up for you. It takes like 3 weeks to get a liquor license.
Oh my goodness!
I was like, oh, thank God, because that's the most stressful part of a restaurant.
Sure.
At least in my world, and obviously yours, is like, I don't fucking know if we're gonna get this, and I can't. Can we get a liquor license? Is there zoning here? Was this a space before that has a lien on it? What background check do you have to get? She's like, fuck it, no problem. We'll get it for you. We're just taking care of it for you. So I thought that was really great. It was nice to.
So what's your big hold up then? If it's not liquor, what's the thing that's kind of hemming you up the most?
The GCs. We got our bid. It wasn't what we thought. We're getting it bid out by 2 other people. So that's where we're at now. The landlord is still doing work. He's delivering us a vanilla box, like plus. We have an amazing landlord.
Nice.
So he's still kind of doing work in there, and then my free rent kicks in when he hands over the space to us. So I'm pretty sure he's still doing some things. So we got a little bit of wiggle room, but yeah, the contractors are really fucking with us right now, which sucks. Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it's part of the process though, man. It's everybody I talk to. Yeah, it's how it is. It's how those guys are, and this and that. You got to get a bunch of second opinions, and you got to go line by line of every fucking detail of what they're charging you. And I'm ready for it.
Do you have architectural drawings done?
Yeah, the design is done. We had a whole design team that did everything already, so the design is set. The contractor bid it out. We weren't happy with the bid, so now we're getting it bid out by a couple people. If we get the bids back before Thanksgiving, I think we could pull the trigger. I doubt construction's going to start before January. I'd love it if it could start in December, but then it's like, okay, they're gonna do construction for 2 weeks and then take the last 2 weeks off and then come back second week of January. So it's probably gonna start. Everybody's told me it's a 4-month build out, maybe less. There's not a lot that needs to be done.
Wow.
So the electrical's in, the grease trap's in, they need to put the hood up. So it's a 4-month build out.
So your partners, how involved are they in your decision making?
No, it's just me.
It's just you.
Me and Matthew. The investors are silent investors. I lean on one of our investors is a restaurateur in Chicago, so I lean on him for a lot of questions, like wealth of information.
Sure.
Ryan, you got to do this, you got to do that. This is what you should be looking at. But it's basically me. I've been doing this since July 2020 is when I got serious about this, and every step of the way, learning how to do this, learning what an operating agreement is. My lawyer was like. She's like, the good thing about you is you learn fast.
Yeah.
And that's why it's easy to work with you, is because we could tell you one thing and now that's already in your brain and you know what happens, and there's not a lot of hand holding because you don't know something, you ask for help, you ask a question, and then you know. She goes, it's really been fun to see you come from the first conversation we had with you of, think about owning a restaurant, to now you're talking about the return on investment and blah, blah, blah. She goes, it's been an interesting process for us to see you grow. So I took that as a compliment.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
Wow. Yeah, you're in it, man.
I'm deep in it. There's no turning back. That's how in it I am. All the equipment is bought. It's sitting in a storage room right now, just sitting in a warehouse waiting to go. The good thing about me is I've been working on this project for so long that when I came to the designers, I had the layout of the kitchen. I had all the equipment that I needed. So we were really far ahead than going to the designers and then being like, okay, well, where do you want to build this stuff? I had the layout of the space. I had it kind of roughly drawn up of how I wanted to look at it. They tweaked it a little bit. Sure. And they were like, we're ready to go.
That's great.
And now it's just been in this bidding out stage for a while.
When was Bali?
January.
Did you get stuck in Bali?
2020, and I had to get out of there at the beginning of April, and I caught like some of the last flights out before they closed the airline. Right. So I flew from Bali. So the pandemic happened. There was like, there's this virus going around China, and Christian Bauman got married in Thailand, and I flew to Thailand in February for his wedding. Like, we didn't know anything, Came back in March and like, okay, this is a fucking thing. So Bali's like, we're going to close. I was consulting at this beach resort. I was fucking living the dream. Yeah. It was awesome. I probably wouldn't have never come back. So like, listen, in like the end of March, like, listen, we're going to close the resort for like 2 months till this blows over. That's how naive everybody was. It's going to blow over. And then we're going to reopen like the end of May. So, with a lot of the expats like myself, they're like, you could stay in Bali, if you want, or, if you want to go back and travel, you're going to have to pay your own way, this and that. And I was like, well, do I want to stay in Indonesia for a respiratory pandemic? Or if I'm going to go anywhere where there's shitty healthcare, I'm going to go back to the United States. So I flew back to the United States, Chicago. I was just partying with my friends because everybody's like drinking at like 9 a.m. So I was like, I'll just hang out here for a little bit. Started up a pasta company because I was bored, where I was selling pasta kits. And then
I remember that.
Realized like we were doing these Zoom calls with Bali, and realized that I'm not going back to Bali in May, and I'm not going back to Bali at all, and this thing isn't going anywhere. And then I was staying with a couple friends who were like, hey, it's been great having you here, but you fucking can't live with us. So I just moved back to my house in Nashville. It was an Airbnb property. And then I got serious. I started looking at the business plan again that I've been writing all 2019. I got really serious about it, and I was like, okay, that's kind of how it happened. Like, I never expected to move back to Nashville. Never.
Yeah, but I think the way you travel is pretty admirable. Yeah. Especially for what we do, because isn't that the best piece sometimes? Is just being exposed to what other people do and how they do it,
right,
and the way in which they do it. And sometimes you can only see that by going somewhere and touching and feeling it. Right. And I don't know a lot of people in my life who've done the kind of travel, like long-term travel that you've done.
I've been extremely fortunate.
And so it's only going to set you up for more and for better. Mm-hmm. And like I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I don't want people to just bounce around from job to job and then use travel as an excuse. But if you have a really good plan, travel should be part of it in your development,
right,
as a chef and as a person.
Well, I traveled out of curiosity. I moved to Spain after the French Laundry and this and that. I came back to Chicago, started opening restaurants, and then the reason I took the 2-year hiatus was when I met you, when I met Mark and all these guys, was out of necessity. It wasn't, I'm just going to go travel the world for a bit. I was a completely broken fucking person. I was working for this restaurant group that just beat the fucking shit out of me. And I didn't even want to cook anymore. And I don't know how I came up with this idea. I started going to therapy to talk to a therapist because I was so fucked up. And I didn't want to cook anymore, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I lay in bed all fucking day. And then they'd start texting me like around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Oh, where are you? And I was managing 2 restaurants, and I was always walking in between. Oh, I'm walking over here. I'd lay in bed all fucking day. And then I started seeing a therapist for these relationship problems that I was having. And I thought I was in these dead end relationships, and I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. And the guy stone cold looks at me one day and goes, I don't think the relationships, I think the job is your problem. I think you hate your job. And he goes, why don't you quit? And I was like, what? I don't have another job. I can't quit. I don't have health insurance. I can't quit. You know, all these like things that were like pre-programmed in my brain. And why would I quit? I need to hang on to the ship as long as possible, you know? So I waited a couple weeks, and I came up with this idea. I was like, I'm going to save as much money as I can for as long as I can. And I'm going to quit in October of 2013. It was like, I think it was like 7 months, 6 months, 7 months. And I saved up a shitload of fucking money. I stopped going out to dinner every night. I stopped buying Air Jordans. I turned off my cable. I started working out more. I started mentally getting myself ready. And the way I got out of that depression was I would show up to the restaurant, and the guys would be so happy that I was there. And I'd show them how to do something, and I could see how they would just light up when I was there. And I was like, okay, like I need to be here for these guys. So every day when I got home, I would write a Post-it note of like, go help Manuel make pasta tomorrow. And I'd put it on the back of my door. And before I left, I'd get up in the morning or in the afternoon. Before I left, I'd be like, this is okay, Miguel needs me. He has to show me how to make pasta. I promised I'd do that. And I'd close the door. And every day I put a new Post-it note of some sort of inspiring thing. Inspire someone today. Lead by example. Don't freak out. Don't get triggered at this. The servers need more information. And by the end of the month, my fucking door and half my wall was covered with these Post-it notes. And I would just glaze over them, and I would read one or another, and I would leave. And then when I saved up all this fucking money, I went in there and I'm like, I quit. And it was such a feeling of like release, you know? But I had come up with this idea. So I went back to the therapist 2 weeks later, and I said, hey, I have an idea. I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to go and I'm going to become a stagiaire again. And he goes, well, I had to explain what stagiaire is. I said, the best time in my life was when I didn't have any responsibility, and I'd show up at these restaurants and I'd work for a month for free, and I would just kind of like do grunt work, wash dishes, whatever, and I would just kind of be a sponge and absorb everything. I'm like, that's what I want. This is what's going to fix me. I cannot take a lateral step in Chicago and take another job. I'm going to be in the same fucking boat with the same people, going to the same bars, complaining about the same fucking shit. I was in the meat grinder. I'm like, I have to remove myself from this situation. And he goes, I think that's a fucking great idea. And I did it, and I didn't know if it was going to work. And I had second guessed myself throughout the whole time I was doing it. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm spending my life savings. What if it doesn't work? Just second guessing. And then that mantra of like, you're doing the right thing. And then I met Mark and Jeff. And then I went to work with Dan Barber. And these guys at top of their fucking game. When Dan Barber pulled me aside and he goes, it's so admirable what you're doing. I wish I would have done that. And he made me stand up in front of everybody and tell them what I was doing. And tell them how I was at this dead-end job and I didn't want to cook anymore. Now I'm just traveling to kind of get re-inspired. And I went from there to Noma to here to here. And I met all these fucking amazing people. And I was in Australia at Bray working with Dan Hunter, who's a fucking amazing guy. Another guy. It's like, this is so cool what you're doing. And I woke up I was there like a month and a half, and I woke up one morning and I'm like, it's time to go home. I'm ready. And I walked in the kitchen and I said, I'm going home. He gave me a huge fucking hug, and I stayed like the rest of the week, and I started making the trek from Australia all the way back, and I went to Hong Kong and all these other places that I didn't visit on this round, and I went all the way back, and I made it back to Chicago. And I had changed so much as a person, and I was on top of the world, and I felt great. And I went back to Chicago to the same people, talking about the same shit, going to the same bars. And I was like, if I don't leave here, everything that I worked for these last 2 years, all this work and second guessing and punishment and fear that I overcame, it's going to be null and void, because I'm going to be back to the same Ryan that I was. And
so that's where Nashville came in?
That's where Nashville, the job at the Capert seat came available, and Trevor helped me get the job. And I was going to go back to Noma. Dan Barber, I was talking to Dan about doing something with him, and I had all these options in front of me. I'm like, Capper's what I want to do. It's small, it's quaint. This is fucking a great fucking job.
Yeah.
I didn't even know where the fuck Nashville was. Never even been. Hate country music. And yeah, that's it. And then when I left, Capper was a hard place, man. It was a hard place to work. I didn't really meet anybody because I was working 16 hours a day, 5 days a week. I didn't have any friends. It was in my 40s, and it was hard to meet people. I was dating somebody and we had broke up. It was a bad breakup and it was tough. It was very hard on me. And when we left Capper, I was like, fuck this. But I bought a house. I bought a house in this city. And then I left and I did some consulting stuff and I just kind of hung out a little bit and went back to Asia. And then the pandemic forced me to come back to Nashville. Now I fucking love it. I met my girl. I'm opening a restaurant. My brother's coming to do it with me. I have tons of fucking friends. I actually enjoy it now.
That's great.
So it was good. It was good that happened.
I mean, look, there's so much value in the reset button sometimes.
The reset was great.
I agree. There's nothing to be ashamed of, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. So what's next for you, man? So you have Vernick, which is crushing it. It was how long have you been there? 6 years now? 7 years?
No, man, we're 10 years old.
10 years, huh?
Vernick's 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we're in the whole 4 seasons.
In the 4 seasons,
with Vernick Fish,
the coffee shop, which is fucking great. And the Vernick Fish is awesome. I've been there a whole bunch of time. The coffee bar is ridiculous.
Yeah, I love it. I love the job.
Yeah.
It's such a change of. It's like I'm two different people. When I'm at one place, it's one type of environment, and then I go to Food and Drink, and it's another. It's like two different. Like to your point, it's two different bands.
Uh-huh.
Sorry. So, on one side, I've got plenty in front of me. I don't know how many chefs actually admit this, but like sometimes I think I've got enough.
Yeah.
Right.
And restraint is an amazing thing.
Right. Yeah. And I know that I have a mountain to climb just coming back from what was, and I'm done making excuses. Mm-hmm. I'm done blaming things on the pandemic and the cost of goods and supply chain issues. I'm done with that. Now it's like, let's start to, carve a path here.
Yeah. Fucking figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, how many times are we going to go back and have a meeting and say, well, it's because of the pandemic. Like, let's go here.
So yeah, not to cut you off, but me and Preston were talking, like, I always ask, like, hey, how'd you do during the pandemic? Like, hey, how did you do? How'd you fare? And now it's 3 years ago.
Right.
It's going to be 2020. That was the pandemic was 3 years ago. I can't ask people how they did.
It's time.
It's time to fucking move on.
Yeah, man. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And so I try to go into the day removing that emotion from the day, like pandemic, all the things, all of it.
Supply chain issues.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
Yeah.
So, we know we have a mountain to climb. Fish is only open 4 days. We want to be open 5 days, and then I want to be open 6 days. Fish was open for lunch. Our goal is to get back to lunch, and we're trying to find our way to get staffed up to do that. Yeah. That's a big process.
Right.
So, one part of me is like, I got enough. I got plenty to do. And the other part of me is like, I'm pretty good at this. I think I could take this on the road.
Yeah.
So I always dance between those two things. And I have a very good group of people who kind of rein me in whenever I go too far in any direction.
That's
and
important,
sort of keep me grounded and put me in check. I've gotten good at putting myself in check at times. I need to do better at certain things that just like my daily routine needs to get better.
Yeah, jiu-jitsu.
I know. You and me should. Yeah. You're always asking me to roll.
Yeah, or do yoga. Yoga for me is like my zen moment.
Yeah.
Man. 1 hour, nobody's bothering me, no cell phone. I could just unplug.
I mean, it's critical. It's almost required in our world to have some sort of exercise or release
outlet.
Yeah. Otherwise, you start to go down some not so pretty paths.
I agree.
So, I mean, we're looking at a few things. We're in no rush, which is a great place to be.
Yes.
So we're just kind of taking our time. We're taking meetings. We're looking at projects mostly everything we look at's a pass. Not because it's not a fantastic gig or opportunity, but it's like it becomes a bandwidth conversation. You know, I need to be available to my teams more now. So the idea of expanding sometimes feels like this weight over me that like, how am I going to be available to my teams? Yeah. And I think a lot of people, it goes into the conversation of how do you scale? Like, how does one scale? And I'm learning that now. I'm right at the beginning stages of understanding how are we going to scale? What are the next 5 years going to look like? I've got kids at home. Am I willing to do this to lose that? Right? So, that's I don't know where I am right now, and yet I know exactly where I am.
And that's okay.
And that's okay because I've come to the conclusion I'm not going to waste my energy on a lot of things that I used to. I'll give you a great quote from my father. He said, "As you get older, friendships get richer."
Yeah.
And I see that, and I feel like I'm valuing friendships more, and I'm valuing relationships more, and I'm trying to lean into that, and I'm in a lot of ways I'm trying to take a page from your book and just be a fan of what people are doing, be supportive, stop drawing comparisons. I don't live by a mantra by any means, but I feel like I'm trying to give off just a better version of myself to the people who I surround myself with. If that makes any sense.
That makes complete sense.
I don't try to sit in meetings and just think about what my counterpoint's going to be.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Or just hear yourself talk. Right. Yeah.
Hey, let's get better at listening, Greg. Like let's really listen, and then maybe your counterpoint is like, I'll get back to you, or let me think about it. It doesn't always have to be
correct,
quick to the draw.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
Right on. I think that's great. Greg, you've been an amazing friend. It was so great to sit down and talk with you. I feel like I got to know you a little bit better.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for doing this, and I think we should end it on that note.
Awesome, man.
Right on.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Love you, bro.